Hello and welcome back to CamBro Conversations. Today's conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by Nir Eyal. Nir, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
And I think with a number of the conversations I've had with authors in recent months and weeks, a lot of the time the author is sometimes scratching an itch by putting down words on paper that they've encountered a problem themselves, and they're kind of bringing forth a solution that both they've found, but also that they want to teach on to others, which will reinforce the lesson for themselves. What was it you were needing to be indistractable from there?
Oh, this is exactly the scenario that I found myself in, that, there's a saying that you teach best what you most need to learn. And that was certainly the case for me, that a few years ago, I found that I was incredibly distracted, and it was because of good things, right? I found that after I published my first book, I had more people calling me for consulting engagements and for speaking gigs and for investment opportunities and all good stuff. But I found that I had less time for the things that had made me successful in the first place, namely the writing and the researching that I do. And so there was really one seminal moment that made me reassess my relationship with distraction. I was with my daughter one afternoon, and we had this perfect day plan, just, quality daddy-daughter time. And I remember we had this book of activities that dads and daughters could do together. And one of the activities in the book was to ask each other this question. The question was, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember the question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said, because for some reason I started checking my phone and got distracted and blew this perfect daddy-daughter moment. And if I'm honest with you, it wasn't just with my daughter. It was when I would say to myself, oh, I'm definitely going to hit the gym today. I'm definitely going to exercise. I'm definitely going to eat right. But I didn't, and I wouldn't. It would happen when I say, oh, I'm definitely going to work on that big project. I'm going to finish that RFP. I'm going to make those sales calls, whatever the case might be. And then 20, 30, 45 minutes later, I'm not doing the things that I said I was going to do at work. So, I really think that the superpower of this century, right? The skill that we all have to acquire in this day and age is the power to be indistractable, because there is no area of your life, whether it's your physical health, your psychological well-being, your work output, every area of your life depends on your ability to control your attention. This is truly how we choose our life. And so the world is bifurcating into people who allow their time and attention to be controlled and manipulated by others, and people who say, no, I am indistractable. I decide how I will control my attention and choose my life.
Yeah, such powerful words. And when we talk about attention nowadays, it is truly probably the most valuable currency that we have, because it links to our time as well, which is finite, of course, and we can't get it back no matter what we do. So I find that very, very striking that there was this one seminal moment that sticks with you, but it was accumulation of things, like you say, where you were avoiding doing the things that you said you would do. And I guess the term that you use in terms of when it comes to describing indistractable is striving to do what we say we will do, which gives us fulfillment and purpose as well. Because if we cannot honor the things that we tell that we're going to do, then it's difficult to look in the mirror and be satisfied with the person that you are. And
that's right. Yeah.
To use like the roadmap that you put forward towards this indistractable outcome, this indistractable approach, is certainly something that I benefited from when I read your book first in 2020. But I guess you've mentioned there that the phone was what distracted you from that daddy-daughter time. And I told you before we hit record that I used to demonize technology a lot more and look at the external influences that were coming my way more than some of the things that you discuss within your book. Why do you think technology gets such a bad rap, particularly given the background that you have with your first book, Hooked?
Yeah. So it's a good place to start, actually, by making sure we define what we mean by distraction. It's a word that I thought I understood, but when I actually dove into the psychology of why don't I do what I say I'm going to do, right? Like why do I get distracted in the first place? I realized I didn't really understand what that term meant. And so that's a good place to start, is what is distraction? So the best way to understand what distraction is to know what distraction is not. So if you ask most people what is the opposite of distraction, they'll tell you it's focus, right? I don't want to be distracted. I want to be focused, but that's not exactly right. The opposite of distraction is not focus. If you look at the origin of the word comes from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. So the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction, which by definition is any action that pulls you towards what you say you're going to do, things that you do with intent, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. The opposite of traction is, of course, distraction. Distraction is any action that moves you further away from your goals, further away from your values, further away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this isn't just semantics. This is really important because I would argue any action can be traction or distraction based on one word. And that one word is intent. Okay. So back to your question around why tech gets vilified. I wanted to say that tech was the problem. I wanted to believe that that was the reason that I was getting distracted until I realized that this is not a new problem, that Plato, the Greek philosopher, was struggling with distraction 2,500 years ago. So it can't be that distraction is caused by our devices. And I would argue that, hey, there's nothing wrong with going on Facebook or watching a YouTube video or listening to a podcast. Anything you want to do with your time is fine, as long as you do it on your schedule, right? If you plan to do it, it's not a distraction. If you plan the time to do any of these things, it's traction. Enjoy it. Don't medicalize and moralize. Like, why is someone spending their time playing a video game morally inferior to watching a football game on TV? There's no difference. Whatever you want to do with your time, as long as you do it with intent, is traction. Now, equally important is to understand that just because something is a work-related task, it can be a distraction. Right. So the thing that I found constantly distracting me was the things that I thought were work-related items, right? I was doing work. I would sit down on my desk and I'd say, okay, now I'm going to sit down and I'm going to focus on that big project. I'm going to get to work. But first, before I do that, let me just check some email.
Yeah.
Right. Let me just scroll that Slack channel real quick. Right. I would justify these acts saying, well, that's a work-related task. I got to check email at some point. And what I didn't realize is that that is the most pernicious, most dangerous form of distraction, the distraction that tricks you into prioritizing the urgent and the hard work. Sorry, the urgent and the unimportant work at the expense of the hard and important work we have to do to move our lives and careers forward. So just because something is a work-related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. If it's not what you said you're going to do with your time, it is by definition also a distraction.
It's the work of a busy fool there, because you feel like you're ticking off tasks, but it's ultimately stopping you from doing the high value, high return tasks that you've said is far more rewarding in the longer term. The intent piece was something that stuck with me a lot, because consciously choosing to check Facebook or consciously choosing to go and consume a podcast and being tuned into that is something that many of us don't actually achieve. But when we do it, it's not morally inferior or morally superior, which again was a really challenging notion for me, where we're thinking, oh, but of course, like being stuck on TikTok for half an hour, that for somebody that strives for high performance could be deemed morally inferior, because it's not right, is it? But then I think the example you gave was to sit and watch a sports game, which I love doing once, twice a week for my football team Rangers. That is deemed fine. But if I spent that 90 minutes scrolling TikTok, people would be horrified that I was not pushing for high performance.
Right. What's the difference? There's no difference. However, this isn't, I intended to go on TikTok right now. That's what I'm doing. No. This has to be planned in advance. Okay. So one of the big lessons of the book is that you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Okay. So let me say that again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if you have a big white open calendar with nothing on it, what the hell did you get distracted from? Everything is a distraction unless you plan your time. So, living in this day and age without planning your time is a fool's errand. What are you doing, right? If you don't have a problem, by the way, if you're, like the small, there are a few people out there that don't have any problem. They do everything they say they're going to do. They read the books they say they're going to read. They spend time with the friends and the family members they say they're going to spend them with. They never look at their phone. They get all their work done on time. They exercise every single day when they say they will. If you're that kind of person, you're listening to the wrong episode. Don't read my book. If you're everybody else, which is 99.9% of us, including the person I used to be, you're struggling. You're struggling with the fact that you could do better. You could be better, right? If you could just follow through on the things you should do with your time and attention. So what I want people to do is not to follow some silly moralistic prescription that, video games and technology is bad, it's rotting your brain. That's silly. That is just dumb. If you want to spend time playing video games, do it. I want you to. It's great. Enjoy yourself. What's life for, right? Enjoy the time, but do it on your schedule. Do it without guilt by planning the time for it, right? So very few people out there listening to me right now have ever experienced the pure bliss of true leisure. Because even when we allow ourselves to indulge in doing something we want to do, we're constantly thinking about all the things we still haven't done, right? Which is one of the reasons that I rally against to-do lists. To-do lists are one of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity because you're constantly thinking about all the things you still haven't done. Whereas when you use the techniques that I describe, that time to play video games or watch your football team or be with your friends or do whatever it is you want to do, that is exactly what you wanted to do. That is exactly what you planned. That is traction. Everything else is distraction.
And it's guilt-free as well. Like you say, if there's lingering thoughts in the back of your head about what's not been done, then of course your ability to really enjoy the game, to really enjoy the film you're watching, to enjoy the dinner date with your spouse, it's lessened by the fact that, oh God, but I've still got this mountain of things to do. Now, I have a little bit of a hybrid approach from your time boxing, time blocking approach and to-do list, because I found that a real challenge to my approach. I love a written to-do list because I feel that I'm ticking things off, but equally, one of the things that I started to do to try and counteract the negativities of the to-do list, which you rightly point out are that it's never ending, are include leisure on there. So it might be like, I love training. So it might be train legs tonight at 5:00 and it's blocked out in my calendar. And I tick that off and it feels satisfying to tick it off. This little ticker in my brain, whatever it is that I'm getting a kick out of the fact that I'm ticking these things off. But previously, the only things in my to-do list were work-related tasks or project-related tasks, which of course, if they were left undone, it felt there was an area of guilt. Whereas if I'm going to do something and then tick it off, that's both pleasurable and for leisure, and it moves me towards other goals, so physique or aesthetics or performance, then that's fantastic. But I fully agree that the to-do list can be a massive burden psychologically on us to enable to have intent in our leisure.
Right. So let me clarify. It's not that I'm against writing things down, right? That's fine. It's great to get things out of your head and put them on a piece of paper or in an app, the things you need to get done. What I'm against is running your life on a to-do list. So if you wake up in the morning and you say, what am I supposed to be doing right now? And you look at your to-do list versus your calendar, you've already made a huge mistake. So the idea here is that you have to time box in addition to, if you so choose, using that calendar. Because if you don't, it's like asking a baker to make you bread without ingredients, right? If you go to the bakery and you say, hey, I need 100 loaves of bread. Okay, you're going to throw a wedding or something, right? You need 100 loaves of bread. The baker's going to say, okay, no problem. I need flour, I need yeast, I need salt, I need all these ingredients in order to make the output. You need input in order to have output. Well, when it comes to our to-do, what we have to do with our time and attention, that is our ingredients. The input for knowledge workers is time and attention. That's the ingredients. So you have to plan for those ingredients. You have to plan for the input in order to get the output. It's not going to just magically appear. Whereas people add more and more and more to their to-do list because to-do lists have no constraints. You can always add more. I want to write my novel and I want to find a spouse and I want to do really well on my job and I want a side hustle and I want this and I want that. And it's overwhelming. So at the end of the day, you get home from work and you look at this huge to-do list of things that haven't still been done. And this begins to reinforce a negative self-image. You start looking at yourself and say, I didn't do all that stuff. Loser, right? So day after day, week after week, month after month, you are reinforcing your self-image of someone who doesn't follow through, of someone who doesn't do what they say they're going to do. And this is where you start hearing people adopting these ridiculous self-defeating myths of, I'm no good at time management. I could never plan my day. That's too rigid. I could never do this. It's all these self-defeating myths because they've been reinforced with a crappy method. That's not them that's broken. It's this methodology of keeping a to-do list. That's what doesn't work. That's what's broken, not them. Whereas a person who plans their day, a person who uses this time boxing technique that I talk about in the book Indistractable, this is the kind of person who gets more done. These are the high performers in life because they plan their time and they realize that there are constraints, right? That there's a reason we talk about time the same way we talk about money, right? You make time just like you make money. You pay attention just like you pay with dollars and cents. And yet people give away their time to just about anything or anyone, right? Oh, here's what's happening on Twitter. And here's my friends want this and my boss wants this and the client wants that. They just give away their time, but their money they're super stingy with, right? We clip coupons, we split lunch dates, we do all this ridiculous stuff to save a buck. But when it comes to our time, the one thing we cannot make more of, this is the one thing we should actually be stingy. We should be generous with our money, but we should be stingy with our time, because you can always make more money, right? You can always make more money. You cannot make more time. So it's only by thinking consciously about how we spend our time and attention that we can make the most of it.
Yeah, completely agree. And to hark back to what you said there, high performers tend to have quite critical self-talk when we don't fulfill the obligations that we're striving towards. And it's very easy to be ashamed, angry, or maybe blame yourself, or even just blame others, like technologies we've already said can be a big scapegoat. So the time boxing approach is vital when it comes to enabling us to agree where our attention and our traction and our activity is going to go at those set points, and then the other times we can enjoy ourselves. But where does our drive and willingness and seeking of distraction come from? Like what's driving our need for it?
Okay, so this is a great question. So now we understand the difference between traction and distraction. So the next question is, well, what drives us towards distraction in the first place? Well, this is where triggers come into play. So most people, when you ask them about distraction, you say, well, why did you get distracted? They'll tell you about external triggers. External triggers are the pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that can lead us towards traction or distraction based on if it's something we plan for. So for example, if you have a phone call scheduled, if you have that workout that you've been planning, if it's on your schedule, an external trigger can be very helpful, right? It's a notification on your phone that says, hey, don't forget to do such and such. Great. It's serving you. It's wonderful. But if it's taking you away from what you plan to do, if it's leading you away from the thing that you plan to do, now it's not traction, it's a distraction. So now it's not serving you, the external trigger, you are serving it. So that's the big distinction between these external triggers that are helpful or the ones that are hurtful. Now, that being said, external triggers only account for about 10% of our distractions. 10%, right? So studies find
this blew me away.
This is
because I think when I'm thinking about managing my environment, it's all about personal phone out the room when I'm doing work. It's all about email notifications off. And of course, we'll get onto that. But wow, 90% is...
Yeah. Where does it come from? What's the other 90%? So thinking about the external triggers is important. There's something you can do there, but I think we way overemphasize it. What we should start with is the other 90%. What is the other 90% of the reason we get distracted? Studies find that 90% of the time that we go off track, we don't get distracted because of an external trigger. We get distracted because of what we call an internal trigger. What is an internal trigger? An internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state that we seek to escape. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety, stress, all of these uncomfortable sensations that we seek to escape. So what most people do, right, what low performers do is that every time they feel discomfort, they escape it, right? They escape it with booze. They escape it with watching the news. They escape it with Facebook. They escape it with a million different things you can use to escape that discomfort. But that, we have to understand, is the root cause of the vast majority of our distractions. So all the tips and tricks, right? All the gurus, all the life hacks, none of that stuff works. Even the stuff in my book, unless you start first and foremost with mastering those internal triggers, or they will become your master.
Yeah, understanding what is making us do that. So an example from my working life, if I'm writing a particularly challenging email back to a client, there's an element of discomfort within me that seeks out that, oh, I'll write it in 5 minutes time. Just let me quickly go check LinkedIn. Let's see if I've got any new connections on there, because it feels like work. But of course, it's just taking me away from the task that I need to do, because it's a little bit unpleasant and I'm a little bit unsure or anxious about what I'm going to write back. And it's very funny how when you start to understand these things, you quickly identify during your working day or whatever you're up to, oh, wow, I stopped doing that because I experienced discomfort. I backed off because I was worried, and something internally inside me was saying, don't do that. It wasn't the fact that LinkedIn was super tempting or I was going to get a lot of dopamine from going and doing that. It was the fact that I would rather avoid pain than deal with what I needed to deal with.
So this is such an important lesson to understand in terms of not just distraction, but also understanding the human psyche. It's understanding, wait a minute, if we know what to do, right? This is such a fascinating question. It's Plato's ancient question of why do we go off track? Well, he called it akrasia in the Greek, the tendency to do things against our better interest. If we know what to do, why don't we just do it? And so we have to understand the nature of human motivation. The nature of human motivation is not what most people think. Most people think that motivation is about carrots and sticks, right? It's about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Sigmund Freud said this. Jeremy Bentham said something similar. It's not true. Turns out that neurologically speaking, everything we do is not about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, but rather, neurologically speaking, everything we do for only one reason, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. Everything you do is about the desire to escape discomfort. This is called the homeostatic response. So if you go outside and it's cold, the brain says, "Ooh, that doesn't feel good. You should put on a coat." If it's you walk back in, now it's too hot, the brain says, "Take your coat off." If you feel hunger pangs, right, the brain says you should eat. And if you ate too much, oh, now you feel stuffed, the brain says stop eating. So everything we do is about the need to restore homeostasis, because everything the brain gets us to do is about the desire to escape discomfort. Even, I know what somebody's thinking, well, what about pleasure? What's pleasure for? Pleasure is about imprinting the memory about wanting something to feel good. So our pursuit of pleasurable sensations is itself psychologically destabilizing. Craving, desire, lusting, all of these things is the reason we say love hurts, right? That's exactly right. Neurologically speaking, that is true. Everything we desire, that desire to feel good, is itself, neurologically speaking, also painful. So by understanding that fact that everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort, if you realize that, that therefore must mean that time management is pain management. Time management is pain management. If you are not doing what you said you're going to do, right? Whether it's, I need to go to the gym, but I don't feel like it. Or I need to do that big project, but I don't feel like it. Or I need to read that book, but I don't really feel like it. Whatever the case might be, listen to what you're saying. It's always a feeling. But we can learn how to overcome those feelings. We don't have to be slaves to these feelings, right? We know how we can respond to them. So what you said earlier is very poignant. I find that there tends to be two kinds of people when it comes to dealing with distraction. We call them the blamers and the shamers. The blamers, they blame things outside themselves. It's Facebook, it's my phone, it's my boss, it's my kids, all these distractions, they're all outside of me, right? It's all their fault. That's what's getting me distracted. But of course, distraction has always existed and will always exist. It's not about the things happening outside of you. And there's no mythical time machine that you can jump into and go back to a time before distraction. It's always been part of the human condition. So that's futile. And on the other end of the spectrum are the shamers. The shamers, they take it on the inside. They say, I'm no good at time management. I have a short attention span. I probably have undiagnosed ADHD. They always, they shame themselves thinking somehow they're broken, that somehow something's deficient with them. For the vast majority of people, right? And only 3% of the population has ADHD. The vast majority of people, there's nothing, clinically wrong with you. There's no reason that you're more distracted. Everybody gets distracted from time to time, but yet that shame cycle makes people feel even worse. When you feel shame, that's a very uncomfortable internal trigger. And so what do we do when we feel an uncomfortable internal trigger? We look for even more escape from that feeling of shame, right? So that doesn't work either. We don't want to be blamers. We don't want to be shamers. We want to be what we call claimers. Claimers claim responsibility, not for how they feel. Okay, this is a very common misconception. People feel that you control your feelings. You don't control your feelings. You don't control your urges any more than you would control the urge to sneeze, right? Think about the last time you felt the urge to sneeze. You can't control that urge to sneeze. You already felt it. The only thing you can do is to control how you will respond to that urge, how you will respond to that sensation, hence the term responsibility. So when you feel the urge to sneeze, do you sneeze all over everyone and get them sick? No, you take out a handkerchief, you cover your face, and you do the responsible thing. And the same goes with our urges, with our feelings. When we don't feel like doing something, we don't have to be slaves to that sensation. We don't have to believe everything we think. We don't have to believe everything we feel. We can take a step back. We can learn some very practical, useful techniques to help us regain our composure and then realize, wait a minute, I can overcome this feeling. I don't have to be a slave to it.
In order to avoid distraction, then, what role do things like mindset, the term control there that you used, and willpower play in this process?
Yeah, so there's a whole section in the book where I talk about willpower and, in fact, the myths around willpower. So I talk about this in terms of reimagining our temperament. Temperament has to do with our belief in our fundamental nature. And I talk about how destructive most people's sense of temperament is. So, for example, there was a widely circulated a bit of research around what's called the ego depletion. And ego depletion said that our willpower runs out like charge in a battery or gas in a gas tank, that we run out of willpower. And this got a lot of buzz in the scientific community. There was one researcher who did this research, and then it kind of got picked up in the popular press. And even today, you'll hear people say things like, oh, willpower is, depleted, or I'm feeling spent, right? So let me get a pint of Ben and Jerry's and sit on the couch because I have no more willpower left, right? I've exhausted that resource. Well, turns out that research couldn't replicate. There's a crisis right now in the social sciences where a lot of these studies we can't replicate them. And if you can't replicate a study, it turns out the evidence suggests it's not real. And so there was one researcher who studied this that had some very interesting results. You mentioned mindset. So the author of the book Mindset, Carol Dweck, is the author of this study. She found, in fact, that some people really do experience ego depletion. Some people really do run out of willpower, like someone would run out of gas in a gas tank. And those people, and only those people, for everyone else, ego depletion did not exist. But only for this group of people, it did exist. Now, who were these people? These people, and only these people, were people who believed that willpower was a depletable resource. So it's only if you believe that you run out of willpower, it became so, which is why this current conversation, it is totally a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what we're discovering more and more is that everything we do is a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's this whole theory of what we call predictive processing that's happening in our brains, where everything we do is about predicting the future, that we're actually living in this hallucination where all of our actions are just being predicted. And so we're constantly self-fulfilling this prophecy, which is why we have to be so careful with the labels we affix to ourselves. And which is why I'm on this crusade to start telling people to stop calling technology addictive, right? Because when we say that, it's the technology that's addicting me, that's why I can't stop. That's why my kids won't stop playing video games. Well, you know what that does? It leads to what we call learned helplessness. That when people think there's nothing that can be done, when it's not me, it's not my fault, it's that's doing it to me, what do? Nothing. They don't do anything about the problem. And so what I'm trying to get people to realize is that, of course, these companies have an incentive, right? It's clear their incentive is to get you hooked, right? That was the title of my first book. I understand every trick in the book because I wrote the damn book. I know all their tricks. And I will tell you that their power, their algorithms, their content is nothing compared to the simple things that we can do to put this stuff in its place, that we have far more power than the tech companies, as long as we believe we have that power. When people give up and they say, oh, well, the government should fix this for me, or the tech company should. Seriously, you really want to tell Facebook, hey, stop making your product so engaging. Hey, Apple, your phones are way too user-friendly. Netflix, can you please make your shows less interesting? I like watching them a lot. That's never going to happen. If you hold your breath, you're going to suffocate. So stop blaming and shaming and start claiming. This is something we can absolutely do a great deal about. We can all become indistractable.
I love that message because personal responsibility has been a key theme with many of the guests that have come on the podcast and spoken to the ability for us to control and claim what we desire we need to do. To bring that kind of learned helplessness piece to life and really show the folly of that kind of technology argument, do you have any friends that have just completely disregarded social media and like deleted all their accounts or anything like that?
Well, I'm not necessarily advocating for one extreme or the other, right? So I'm not saying use it more. I'm not saying use it less. I'm saying use it the way you want to use it, with intent. There's so much good that can come out of using these technologies. I mean, I have so many friends I would not be in touch with were it not for social media. I mean, I thank God for these technologies, especially in the last couple of years when we had to go through this terrible pandemic and we couldn't travel, we couldn't see friends and family. Social media and these technologies has been an absolute lifeline to many people. So it's very elitist, I think, and to say, well, just stop using it, right? Put digital, detoxes and that crap. It's silly. It's really about how we use these things. It's the same thing when it goes to food, right? When we vilify food and make make it like the sugar companies are addicting everyone. No, come on. McDonald's is very tasty. It's not crack cocaine, people, right? Like, we can do something about it, but we have to be mindful about it. We have to know these tactics. And unfortunately, this isn't stuff we're taught. right? We're not typically taught in school how to manage our attention, how to focus, how to manage our time. It's not really a skill we learn, let alone how to manage our urges and impulses and feelings. That's really not something that's taught in school, but it is a skill you can acquire.
Yeah, urges, impulses, feelings, that links to your food example there entirely. A lot of the reason that people develop disordered behaviors with food is to get away from trauma or to get away from feelings of inadequacy or whatever else is going inside their head. So very, very common,
Absolutely.
particularly in the fitness space, actually, particularly if maybe somebody preps for like a physique show and they get to their best ever physique and they win or they lose or whatever comes afterwards, the crash afterwards to kind of reach that high again sometimes comes from chasing gratification in food. And much like we reach for technology or something else to get away from feelings of inadequacy or whatever discomfort we've got, that creates distraction. So regarding willpower and mindset, then we've obviously said we've debunked the myth that willpower is finite and we have an amount of fuel. How do we overcome some of these urges then? How can we better not distract ourselves? How can we continue to gain traction?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's four big strategies that we have to understand to become indistractable. Number one is mastering the internal triggers. That has to be the first step. If you don't master these internal triggers, they become your master. So that's step number one. Step number two is to make time for traction. This is a very simple practice that very few people do, but almost all high performers do, which is that they plan their day. They use this time boxing technique. And it's amazing when you look at really high performers and you look at their calendar. They all do this by and large. They plan their time just like they would plan a budget for their money. They plan their time. Then the third step is hacking back the external triggers. So this is where we go into the nitty gritty of how do we hack back the external triggers of social media and your phone and your computer. And what if you're working from home and the external trigger isn't, your colleagues or your boss? The external triggers is your kids and your pets. What do you do about that? We hack back all those external triggers. So we go, step by step through all these external triggers. Email, that's a big one. Meetings, how many stupid meetings do we attend that are nothing more than distractions? So I show you how to hack back each and every one of these potential external triggers. And then finally, the last step is to prevent distraction with Pacts. Pacts are the firewall. They're the last line of defense against distraction. So it's really with these four steps in concert. There is no one magic bullet. But when we use these four big strategies, this is how we become indistractable. And we can go into the details in terms of, okay, well, give me some tips. How do we do that?
Yeah, of course. So if we were to look at throughout these, I know that knowing your values plays a very big part in that, and that helps us to plan ahead. How would you suggest people better know what their values are in order to where they should channel their traction and where they should allocate their time?
Yeah, this is a big one. So step number one is mastering the internal triggers. We need a bunch of arrows in our quiver ready to go whenever we feel this discomfort. So that's step number one. Step number two is make time for traction. And this is exactly the question you posed of, okay, I get it. I agree with you, Nir. I need to plan my time. How do I do that? Well, it starts by understanding what your values are. We've got to turn our values into time. Let me say that again. Turn your values into time. If you want to see someone's values, what their values really are, not what they say they are, but what they really are, you look at two things. You look at how they spend their time and you look at how they spend their money. And so we have to start with what are values? What's the definition of values? My definition of values are attributes of the person you want to become. So what I want you to do is to ask yourself, how would the person I want to become spend their time? Okay. And we have these three life domains to help us sort out our values. The first life domain is you. Okay. If you can't take care of yourself, can't take care of others, you can't make the world better. You have to take care of yourself first. How do you do that? You look at your calendar in the week ahead and you ask yourself, how would the person I want to become spend time on themselves? Does that include a bedtime? Right? How many of us as parents, we yell at our kids and we say, you got to go to bed on time, but do we have a bedtime? We're hypocrites, right? We've got to have a bedtime too. We've all heard how important sleep is. You've read, I'm sure, 100 books on sleep is so important, but do you have a bedtime? Right? It's common sense. Or people say, I need to wake up early. How do I do that? All right, numbnuts, what's your bedtime? It starts with the bedtime. It's got to be on your calendar. Put it on your calendar and then start backing up into it. Okay, if I need to go to bed at 10, what time do I need to start washing up and brushing my teeth, et cetera? Like, you don't have to plan every little minutia, but I would say in, 15, 20, 30-minute increments, start putting that time on your calendar. Let's say reading books is important to you. If being knowledgeable is important, do you have that time on your calendar to read a book? Do you have time to do fun things like play video games, right? Or watch a football game. You want to do that? Great. If that's how you want to take care of yourself, if that's what the person you want to become would do with their time, put it on your calendar. The next life domains is friends. Now, sorry, not just friends, relationships is the second life domain. Now, within that relationship domain is friends, family, community, people who are important to you, who depend on your time and attention. And so this is absolutely critical. We put this on our calendar because we know that in the Western world today, that there is a loneliness epidemic, right? And we know that loneliness is as detrimental to our health as smoking and obesity, that people report having fewer close friends than ever before. Now, this is happening because as society became more secular, there were fewer regular occasions to get together with people who we care about and who care about us, right? If you weren't going to church on Sunday, if you weren't going to the Kiwanis Club, if you weren't going to, the bowling league every Thursday night or whatever it was, you had fewer connections with the people in your community. We've got to bring that back. And the way we do that is by having that time for our most important relationships, for our spouse, for our kids, for our friendships. It is super important to have that time reserved on your calendar to be with the people you love. Put that time in there. And the third life domain is the work domain. Now, this is what most people start with, but actually I think it's the one we should end with. It's the third area because we've got to do the other two first. The work domain, work can be subdivided into two kinds of work. We have what we call reactive work and reflective work. Reactive work is how most low performers spend their day. Reacting to emails, reacting to messages, reacting to phone calls all day long. That's reactive work. And I understand some part of your day needs to be reactive work. It's part of everybody's work environment these days, is reacting to people's needs. I get that. But what high performers do is that they plan at least some part of their day for what we call reflective work. Reflective work, as opposed to reactive work, is the kind of work that can only be done without distraction. Planning, strategizing, thinking, for God's sakes, must be done without distraction. So I'm not saying your entire day needs to be spent doing reflective work, but if you're not planning at least some time in your day, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe an hour of reflective work, you are probably running real fast in the wrong direction. So you've got to plan that time and keep it sacred.
Because inevitably that reactive work, the time will expand, or the task will expand to fill the time that you've got in your 9-5 or whatever you've assigned to yourself. Whereas the reflective work, which will be a bit more painful and there'll be a bit more discomfort to do because it's more challenging, it requires more brain power, it requires more attention and traction and focus and all these terms that we've thrown around today. Of course, that will be the first thing that slides, because we'd love to run away and be like, oh, but I answered this email within 10 minutes. Great.
And look, most people don't really like to think. This is the sad reality, that thinking is hard work for a lot of people, right? But if we don't do that, if we don't put in the time to say, wait a minute, am I spending my time the way I really want? Am I living my life in a way that I won't regret in a few years, right? That sometimes causes us to think of things that are a little difficult, but we've got to do it. Or I'm telling you, you will look back and say, why didn't I spend my time doing the things that I really wanted to do that were in accordance with my values?
Yeah, and knowing those values, like you say, huge part of this puzzle. That third layer then, where we're talking about hacking back some of the external triggers. Of course, we've noted that internal makes up 90-10. So this 10% is a smaller part. But for those of us that are trying to take control of those internal ones, trying to surf those urges and manage where we go, how can we hack back things like email, for example, which I think a lot of people still get drastically wrong. Like you say, we'll dive over and we'll fill out, I've cleared I've inbox 0. Where's my medal? Where's my commission?
Yeah. So email is definitely a bane of many people's existence these days. And it used to certainly be a problem I had. And I came up with this technique that reduced the time that you spend on email by up to 90%, 90. And it's a pretty simple technique. So I'll give you a quick rundown. Now, there's dozens of other techniques in the book, but I want to give you this very practical tip. And just to reiterate, again, external triggers are not the leading cause of distraction. You've got to figure out, step 1 and 2, which is master internal triggers is step number 1, make time for traction number 2. The third step is to hack back external triggers. And one of those external triggers, I cover 8 different external triggers in the book, is email. So here's the technique. Here's what I want you to do. Studies find that the time we waste on email is not spent in the checking or the replying. The time wasted on email is on the rechecking. Okay. The rechecking of email. It's a huge waste of time. And you know what this looks like, right? You open an email, you read it real quick, you put it away. 10 minutes later, what was that email again? You open it, you read it, you put it away. That's got to stop. So here's the rule. Every time you get an email, you only touch it 2 times or less. Here's how it works. You open that email, and the first question you need to ask yourself is not what's the contents of the email. You need to ask yourself the most important question, which is, when does this need a reply? Okay, when does this need a reply? If it never needs a reply, you just delete it or archive it, right? If it's a piece of spam, done. Okay, never touch it again. If it does need a reply, you're going to put it into 2 categories. Okay, the first category is going to be things that need a reply today. That's going to be about 20% of your email on average needs a reply today. Okay, the other 80% needs a reply sometime this week. So you're going to use labels. And if you don't know how to use labels, Google it. Every email service provider can let you use labels. You want to label it based on those 2 criteria, either today or this week. Then you're going to have time in your time box calendar to reply only to the emails that need a reply this week. Now, how often you check email in your day, that's up to you. Maybe you need to reply once a day for a couple hours. Maybe it's 3 times a day. I don't care, but put it on your calendar. Don't be the kind of person who checks email when they can't think of anything else to do. Okay. Then you're doing it because of an internal trigger of uncertainty, stress, anxiety. Don't be that person. Put it on your calendar so it doesn't interrupt you or it doesn't make it something that is on your head while you're trying to do reflective work. So the 20% of emails that you have to reply to today, that's on your calendar. Well, what about the 80%? Where's the time saved? Here's where the miracle happens. Turns out that of those 80% of those emails that need a reply sometime this week, studies find that 50% of that 80% won't need a reply if you give it some time, that they just evaporate. Why? Because people figure out stuff for themselves, or they get the priority that used to be important on Tuesday by Thursday has been crushed under the weight of some other priority. And now that email is irrelevant. So by asking yourself, when does this email need a reply, and labeling them by either today or this week. And then the critical part here is that sometime in your week. So for me, it's Message Monday. Every Monday, I run through all those messages the 80% that I put aside in a 3-hour block. And it's amazing. Literally every week, 50% of those emails, I don't even need to reply to. So it's a huge, huge time saver.
Huge time save. And combined with your work and Cal Newport's and James Clear's, I've started to improve how I deal with my emails. And we were joking when we got this arranged that I was replying to you on a Thursday evening UK time, which is I have like an hour set aside for what I call podcast prospecting. So that's speaking to potential new guests. And by doing that, it doesn't spill over into my 9 to 5, and it doesn't spill over into my leisure time. And I don't spend hours and hours and hours replying here and there to emails. So for you to bring that to life for us and have your kind of Message Monday, and like you say, a lot of stuff during that period will have fallen off. Either a colleague will have replied, or something else will have come up, or like you say, they'll have Googled the answer, or they'll found the answer somewhere else. So they don't have to hassle you. Very, very, very interesting. I would ask you about smartphones, but I think it'd be more beneficial in the time that we've got here to talk a wee bit more about pre-commitments and pacts. What are these and why are they important?
Yeah, so this is the last of the 4 steps. This is the fail-safe, the firewall against distraction. The idea here is that sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite mastering internal triggers, making time for traction, and hacking back the external triggers, sometimes we still fall off track. And so the idea here is to have that last line of defense. So pre-commitment is a step we take in advance to prevent us from doing something we don't want to do. So what does this look like? There are 3 kinds of pacts. We have price pacts, effort pacts, and identity pacts. A price pact is when there's some kind of financial disincentive to doing something you don't want to do. Okay. Or not doing something you promise yourself to do. So the example in my case, so I used to be clinically obese, and I always hated exercise, hated it. Today, I'm in the best shape of my life. I'm 43 years old, about to be 44. For the first time in my life, I actually can see my ab muscles. I've never had that before because I used to be obese. And I'm not saying this to brag. I don't have good genes. It's just that I exercise when I say I will, right? And for me, that was a real problem. How did I get into that routine? Well, I used a price pact. And I bought myself this calendar that I have in my closet. I see it every day. And taped on this calendar is a crisp $100 bill on today's date. And every day I have a choice to make. It's called the burn or burn technique. You see, because above that calendar, I have a Bic lighter. And so every day for the past, it's been 4 years now, I can either burn some calories, right? It's called the burn or burn technique. I can either burn some calories or burn the $100 bill. Now, I've used this technique for over 4 years. To be honest, I don't really need it anymore because I've never had to burn the money, because I always just do the push-ups or go to the gym or take a walk or do something physical. That's what I promised to myself. Your promise can be different. But for me, it was enough of that motivation to be like, really, I'm going to waste $100 here. I'm going to lie to myself and not do this. Okay, fine. I'll just do the exercise. So having that pact, having that financial price pact can be very, very effective. I also did this with my book, right? I wrote this book, and I did the research for the book, and now it was time to actually write it. So I made a bet with my buddy Mark, and I shook his hand. I said, Mark, if I don't finish this book by January 1st, I'm going to give you $10,000. Well, do you think I gave him the money? Of course not. I finished my book and I kept my money, right? So it's a very, very effective technique.
Near the price pact with yourself, I think more people might trick themselves or self-talk, but that bet with your friend, there was no way he was going to let 10 grand drop. So of course you were on the hook for that unless you got down to business and wrote it.
Super, super effective. And don't give it to like a charity, because that's a good thing, right? You want to like make sure the money is gone, right? You don't want to give it to something you like. You don't want any kind of positive reinforcement. So that's an example of a price pact. An effort pact is when there's some bit of friction in between you and something you don't want to do. So in my household, we had this problem where night after night, I was going to bed later and later. And so this was a problem for me. So what did I do? I got a timer, this $10 outlet timer, that I plugged in my internet router into this outlet timer. And every night at 10 p.m., my internet shuts off automatically. I don't have to think about it, right? So having that effort pact of, yeah, I could unplug and replug and go under my desk and, fidget with it a bit, but that would take effort. That would take work. So having that bit of effort, that bit of friction that, hey, that makes me think, wait a minute, do I really need to go through this whole hassle of turning the internet back on past 10 o'clock? Or should I do what I said I was going to do, which is get to bed, right? So that would be an example of an effort pact. And then finally, an identity pact, right? An identity pact uses the psychology of religion to help us be more likely to stick with our long-term goals. So someone who calls themselves a devout Muslim or an observant Christian or even a vegetarian, right? A vegetarian doesn't wake up in the morning and say, should I have a bacon sandwich for breakfast? No, they're vegetarians, who they are. So having an identity, having some kind of moniker makes you much more likely to stay on track. So if you listen to this podcast, you can call yourself Indistractable. Right? Indistractable is a term I made up. Indistractable sounds like indestructible, right? It's a skill of the century. It's supposed to sound like a superpower. You can call yourself.
Trying to change me to indestructible.
Yes, exactly. I'm trying to get that into the dictionary. but you can call yourself indistractable, and just by that very act of calling yourself indistractable, stop calling yourself bad at time management or I have a problem focusing and whatever. Toss that identity out the window. You are now indistractable. You are the kind of person who strives to do what they say they're going to do. And having that moniker and telling other people about it makes you much more likely to abide by your long-term goals.
Yeah, brilliant examples. The price pact is kind of that extreme end where you're trying to cause yourself harm if you were to not follow up on your desires and what you said you were going to do. The effort pact is just putting some obstacle in the way, so making it more friction. And then, of course, the identity pact is that self-talk, which we spoke about from the very start of this discussion, is so important with how we view ourselves and how we behave. And again, links to this combination of books, which I found so valuable during 2020, yourself, James Clear, Cal Newport, where doing things that you think the person you want to be would do is so valuable. And it's great when these kind of things interlink, albeit with lots of different strands to them. But Nir, incredible conversation for me. Thoroughly enjoyed that. If people want to continue the conversation with you, where should they head towards?
Yeah, thank you. They can go to nirandfar.com, which is my blog, and Nir is spelled like my first name. So that's NIR and far.com. And if you go to indistractable.com, there's actually an 80-page complimentary workbook. We couldn't fit it into the final edition of the book, so I put it online for free. And that's at Indistractable. It's spelled IN, the word distract, ABLE, indistractable.com.
I can link both of those in the show notes below, and I'll also link the Amazon link to get your hands on Indistractable as well. I hope you've all enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. If you have, please take a screenshot, pop it on your Instagram story, tag me at call.cambro, and I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.